Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at House Blackwood, one of the most intriguing houses in the Riverlands, but at that point in our travels around Westeros, we spent some time in the north looking at the more interesting houses we have up there, culminating with House Stark, and then we also looked at the Night's Watch. But now we've moved down to the Riverlands, so I will happily take some suggestions afterwards if you want to leave them down in the comments as to which houses in the Riverlands you'd be most interested in having deep dives into. But I thought I'd start off with the obvious selection, which is House Blackwood. As we'll get into, I'm sure, over the course of this live stream, they all the way through the history that we have, particularly during the history of the Targaryen reign, they're there sort of in the background, and there's always some kind of mystery sort of surrounding them. So let's get into this. As always, I have got a whole load of questions from my patrons. I will be picking them up as we go through, and also I will pick up as many questions from the chat. I saw one super chat that came through from Stephanie Brendel saying, I've missed live for the last couple of weeks. It is my son Maverick of House Payne's birthday today, so we are off to dinner, but he would love a shout out. I will catch up with you guys later on. So Maverick of House Payne, happy name day. I hope you have a fantastic meal out and a blessed year ahead. So let's get into this. As always, I will do a little bit of an overview and intro first before we get into the questions. House Blackwood, I've chosen, as well as the fact that they're just a fascinating house, there's a link here with the North that we were looking at before, because House Blackwood started as a northern house. This is one of those things which goes back way back in time to the Age of Heroes, or perhaps even earlier. We hear that they were based in the Wolf's Wood, which is that massive wood just to the west of Winterfell. And normally we should take these kind of ancient histories with a bit of a pinch of salt, perhaps. George R. R. Martin encourages us to do so. But here in the World of Ice and Fire, we do get a little bit of additional information that these stories that the House Blackwood have about their own history, they are corroborated by some runes, which an obscure maester has managed to transcribe. And so this does seem to be the case. This does definitely seem to be a matter of House Blackwood having once been in the north and were then driven from the north by House Stark, which means that they are northerners in ethnicity, I suppose we would probably call it these days, and also in religious practice. They are first men rather than Andals. They practice the religion of the old gods. And when they were pushed from the north, they found a new home in what we now call Raventree Hall. Now, I was going to pull up the map I normally show from quartermaster.info. That and quite a few others. There's a little bit of uncertainty about exactly where Raventree Hall is, so I thought I'd just explain it rather than go into sort of pointing at a map and say, well, might not be exactly there. Raventree Hall is in the northern part of the Riverlands. It is north of River Run. There's a section that we get a few bits of action from near Old Stones, also Hag's Rest, I think it's called, where Rob paused for a bit en route, his last stop before going to the Red Wedding, where he signed his will. It's not too far from there. Now, House Blackwood established their home in the Riverlands, and relatively early on, it seems that they then became kings over part of, or perhaps all of, the Riverlands. It's not 100% sure, although quite soon after, they also started getting into a rivalry with their new neighbours, House Bracken. Now, this is a running theme throughout all of the history of the Blackwoods. It's mentioned in A Song of Ice and Fire, it's mentioned in Dunk and Egg, it's mentioned in The World of Ice and Fire, it's mentioned in Fire and Blood. This is the big rivalry between two houses that we have pretty much in entirety of Westeros. There are other houses that have been at war with each other on and off for a long time, but if you're talking about bitter rivals, it is these two houses that everybody sort of talks about. And over centuries, millennia even, then we see that sometimes one of them is sort of gets the upper hand, sometimes the other gets the upper hand, but nobody ultimately wins. And when we reached the point of the story that we're at now, they are both still strong, but part of this history is clearly the fact that these two great houses, House Bracken, when the Andals invaded, House Bracken were one of the many houses, the vast majority of the South, who decided that they would intermarry with the new Andal invaders. They would adopt their faith, the faith of the Seven. They'd adopt their customs. House Blackwood didn't. They survived. They clearly came to some accommodations, but they would not compromise. They kept on worshipping the old gods. They kept as first men rather than intermarried with the Andals. Now, there's lots of stories going both ways that we get between these two houses, where the Blackwoods claim that they were kings and then they got betrayed by the Brackens. The Brackens claim it was basically the other way around. But the most famous of these is the fact that the Blackwoods have in their home, Raventree Hall, they have a weirwood tree. Now, this is not just a normal weirwood tree. The word we hear to describe it from Jaime Lannister, who sees it. He has seen lots of weirwood trees in his times. He's been traveling around the Seven Kingdoms. He's seen Winterfell's weirwood tree as well as many others. And this clearly is something different. This is colossal, is the word that he uses, this weirwood tree. It's the pride of Raventree Hall. And although it clearly spent a long time growing to this massive size, House Blackwood claim that House Bracken poisoned it somehow. And sure enough, when we are where we are at in the main story of A Song of Ice and Fire, the tree is dead. It is still colossal, it's still standing, but it is dead. Now, what you find with weirwood trees is that when they die, they slowly turn to stone, or sort of a stone-like substance. And that seems to be what has happened with this colossal weirwood tree at Raventree Hall. Now, that doesn't take away, although the Brackens took huge offense, as you would understand, this sort of the Blackwoods against what they thought that the Brackens had done, the symbolism of the tree carried on. Yes, their home is called House Raventree Hall. Their house, it's entirely possible, also comes from the tree, House Blackwood. Now, why? Weirwood trees are white. But what we find is that every night, even up to the time of the main story, every night thousands of ravens descend on that tree and roost there overnight, giving it this sort of eerie black look to it. So that's their home, where they have been for millennia. If we sort of move forward through to the time of the Targaryen invasion, through that long period of hundreds, thousands of years, we've had the Blackwoods have been sort of rising and falling like many other houses in the Riverlands. The Riverlands is always, throughout the story, the Riverlands is kind of the apex of where all of these battles happen. If a power grows in Westeros, eventually it will start trying to take some of the Riverlands, because that's in the middle. The Riverlands, as a part of the Seven Kingdoms, it borders almost all of the other, well, the Iron Islands being the obvious exception, but almost all of the other parts of the Seven Kingdoms. And so this is where battles happen, and the Blackwoods survive all the way through this. They tie themselves to various houses. House Durrandam for a while. There was a time when actually a bastard-born son of House Bracken and House Blackwood became a king, founded a new house, House Justman. House Justman ruled the Riverlands for 300 years. So the Blackwoods survived through all this time, but when the Targaryens arrived, the Blackwoods were one of the first to take their side. Now, this is at least partly, one suspects, because House Hoare, as in Harren the Black, who had built Harrenhal, they had been enemies. They had taken lands and done bad things, allegedly, to the Blackwoods, and so the Blackwoods took the Targaryen side, partly to be kicking out House Hoare. But although they may have wanted to, and when House Hoare were deposed in rather dramatic fashion by the Targaryens, although the Blackwoods may have wanted to step into the breach to be named the House Paramount of the Riverlands, that honour went to House Tully. This upset the Blackwoods. It also upset the Brackens. It also upset the Mallisters, the Freys, lots of houses who were either older or more royal in their own understanding of who they are, or richer, or had bigger armies, or had more lands than the Tullys, and yet the Tullys were the family that the Targaryens went with. Anyway, despite this, the Blackwoods started over time to become actually quite strong Targaryen loyalists. When it comes to the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons, when you have that Great Council, when Charis calls the Great Council to decide who's going to be taking over after him, House Blackwood noticeably are one of the houses that are named that support Laenor as the person who should be inheriting, rather than Viserys, and they keep up following what then became, or supporting what then became, Team Black. So when the Dance of the Dragons happened, they are one of the most prominent supporters of Team Black, and one of the few on the mainland at the very beginning. So what you'll find, if you look at the very start of the Dance of the Dragons, is Team Green launched their coup, for want of a better word, and they had a whole load of very clear support on the mainland. They obviously down in the Reach with the High Towers up into King's Landing, they were holding that. The strength of the Team Black was actually on the islands off of the east coast, Dragonstone, Driftmark, places like that. The Blackwoods were one of the few who almost immediately came out in favour of Team Black. Now, at this point, I should probably just give the usual House of the Dragon spoilerish warning. On this channel, the spoiler policy is I don't do spoilers for House of the Dragon. I don't know any spoilers for House of the Dragon, incidentally, but I will happily say what happens in the books. They've been roughly sticking to the books. There have been a few changes, so what happens in the books doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen on the show, but that's what we'll be talking about. So in the book, we get House Blackwood involved very early on, with a whole series of, as you would probably guess it, battles with House Bracken, who, of course, have chosen the opposite side. They've chosen Team Green. And through this, I will talk a little bit more. I've got some questions on this, so I'll sort of skate past it a little bit quickly. One of the key characters in this whole drama is someone who is known as Black Alley, Alison Blackwood, who is an extremely talented archer. And she and a few of the other Blackwoods get involved in a huge amount of the most significant battles that happen in the Riverlands during the Dance of the Dragons. And she ends up in King's Landing at the time, at the end of the dance, when, Cregan Stark, the Winter Wolves, arrive down in King's Landing and basically want to carry on the war. They have their own reasons. I covered that when we were talking about the Starks. And Cregan Stark basically wants to just create a strong peace, let's put it that way. And one of the things he wants to do is he wants to be executing a whole load of the people who were responsible for the assassination of the king. He believes them to be responsible. Black Alley is central to persuading him to just calm down. Basically, in particular, she negotiates the fact that Corlys Velaryon should basically just be let off. Corlys Velaryon at this stage is an old man. And he was almost certainly just doing what he thought was right to bring peace to the Seven Kingdoms. Black Alley, as part of this, she ends up marrying Cregan Stark and heading up north with him. Then, if we kind of fast forward a little bit, we get another key Blackwood. Another key Blackwood woman as well, Melissa Blackwood, who becomes the sixth mistress of King Aegon IV. Now, Aegon IV was the person who had all of those bastard children, the great bastards, and we know about that. We had Daemon Blackfire, Bittersteel, and so on. Melissa Blackwood was the mother of Bloodraven. So Bloodraven is this immensely fascinating character, immensely powerful character, and he is half Blackwood. Skip forward again a couple of generations, and we get to Egg, who we know from Duncan Egg, who will go on to become King Aegon V. He also marries a Blackwood, Betha Blackwood, and that's a marriage for love. It's not a political marriage. They meet almost certainly. They will meet in one of the upcoming Duncan Egg short stories. Whenever we get that, The Village Hero is the sort of the working title of that George R. R. Martin has told us, being a dispute between the Brackens and the Blackwoods. And although Egg will be still very young, he will almost certainly meet Betha Blackwood and then at some point later marry her. Now, she is important not just because the children, the four children of Aegon V, obviously she is their mother, but also she was, we're told, very much the driving force behind the four of them having political marriages. And that didn't work out so well. All of those political marriages which were proposed fell through for various reasons. But what this does mean is that if you then come to the Targaryens that we know, you have Jaehaerys II. His mother was a Blackwood, so he's half Blackwood. If you then come down another generation, his two children married each other. So you sort of take the same kind of DNA. They are both, therefore, as in Jaehaerys married his sister and then made his two children marry each other. So that same genetic inheritance came down to the point where we have Eris, the Mad King, was also half Blackwood, and his children, therefore, are also half Blackwood. The Blackwood genetics are strong when you get to people like Daenerys, Viserys, even if we're assuming R plus R equals J, John. So the Blackwoods are not, although they come across as kind of like a mid-ranking house family in the Riverlands, and they are politically, but in terms of sort of the importance for the current story, Blackwoods, or people with very strong Blackwood genetic inheritance, are some of the most central characters we have in this entire story. Bloodraven, Dany, John, these Rhaegar, these people are part Blackwood, half Blackwood in many cases. So House Blackwood are fascinating because and we'll dig into this a lot. There is not much that you can actually kind of pin on them to say, well, that's clearly them doing some mystical thing behind the scenes. There's not much of an evidence of sort of a long-term plan going on over millennia with them, but at the same time, they're clearly at the center, or Blackwoods, if not the Blackwood family, clearly at the center of a huge amount of things that have been going on, particularly in the latter half of the Targaryen rule in the Seven Kingdoms. Okay, that's the sort of the broad overview. Let's quickly dip into the chat. Steve Ashland, Turner, bad joke for the stream. Thank you very much for this. Why shouldn't you trust a weirwood? It's kind of shady. I like that one. Thank you very much. Mod love and merch plug, Robert. Oh, thank you. Merch plug. There should be merch down there somewhere. Have at it. I like it. Maybe you will too. And mod love. Let's do an early mod love. The moderators here are fantastic. Thank you so much for all you do, making this place open, accessible, and safe for anyone in the chat. Think I had another there we go. Caius Ballerina saying, why do you think George R. R. Martin chose to make the sigils mirror Gondor and Rohan? Blackwood is the white tree and Bracken is the horse. I mean, so George R. R. Martin, I don't think he specifically said that this is an inspiration, but he does get a lot of inspiration from The Lord of the Rings. He reads it regularly. I mean, people often sort of say, oh, well, he doesn't, he's always having a dig at it. This is his answer to it or whatever. He's a massive fan of Tolkien. And he gets inspiration. You can see dotted throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, lots of references to it, echoes, nods. So he is this a thing? My take is probably it's a nod rather than a suggestion of anything, because Gondor and Rohan, whatever the films kind of played up where was Gondor when the Westfold fell, they were strong allies, massively strong allies. That was a film only quote. It was never an issue in the book. So I think it's just perhaps a nod, and that's about it. Nicole Nark just saying, couldn't get a question in this week but wanted to show my support. Well, thank you. Don't know if you'll see this, but have the Brackens and Blackwoods ever had a Romeo and Juliet situation? Yeah, I did mention a little bit earlier, there was, and we don't know the details of this, but there was a bastard child of both houses who founded a house called House Justman, which then grew in power and ruled the Riverlands for 300 years. So, yes, there was a bastard son of both houses, implies that there must have been some sort of love affair between the two, somebody from each house, and their child clearly managed to unite them for, 200 years. 300 years isn't brief, but yeah, it didn't last forever. Scott Jefferson, thank you very much for your first super thanks. Hugely appreciate that. Man of War saying not a word about little Benny Blackwood. Are you not a fan? So Benjicott Blackwood, yes. So he was Lord around the time of the Dance of the Dragons. Yeah, he's a really interesting and cool character. I think the thing that I was wanting to emphasize, I've got a question on this later, so I will dig into this a bit more, is that one of the other distinctives about House Blackwood, like, say, House Mormont in the north, is that although, yes, there are ruling lords and so on through the ages, the characters who seem to have the biggest impact on this plot are actually from the house are actually female. So like Betha, like Black Ali, like Melissa. So that, I think, it's noteworthy, and I think it's generally from George R. R. Martin is a positive sign. He doesn't create sort of good guys and bad guys, but a house that is sort of more sort of allowing of the female members of it to take strong leads in this story often denotes a house that George R. R. Martin is quite sympathetic towards. I think I did have another. Steve Ashlenerton saying Doran Martell's master plan successfully achieved by the Blackwoods. Yeah, this is my slightly tongue-in-cheek approach to Doran Martell, which is that Doran Martell is often considered a strategic genius, and yet when you look at what his plan is, it largely boils down to, I'm going to marry my family to House Targaryen, which he tries 4 times, I think. The Blackwoods successfully managed it. Yotafro saying the mic quality is impeccable today. Well, thank you. I'm very pleased. I've had another tweak, so I hope that that's working. I'm going to get somebody in to look at it all properly at some point in the next few weeks. So hopefully that will leave all of the audio problems in dust behind us. But I'm glad it's working today. I'll keep up these tweaks and go forward with it. Rabbi OB saying, I had a theory on the Weirwood network. I think the part that remains after you die is how the network grows, and it's what powers the Green Seer. Interesting. Oh, and then the second part to this, they need to stop the others because they are disconnecting nodes from the network, reducing their power. I think the Lord of Light would also be opposed to this, what with all the burning. Yes, so, well, this is interesting. The part that remains is actually, this is connected to a video. I'm going through very slowly, going through old videos and redoing them, particularly old videos where either the video quality itself is not very good, or maybe I've changed my thinking on a few things. One of the ones that I'm currently redoing and will probably come out in a week or two's time is one on Qyburn, and the central point to that is that Qyburn, if we put to one side any kind of moral assessment of what he's doing, as a scientist, he seems to be onto something, in that the way he tells this story, this is a digression, but we will bring this back to House Blackwood, I promise you. He has this conversation with Jaime Lannister, who asks him rather randomly whether he believes in ghosts, and Qyburn says no, he doesn't. Or more precisely, he actually just goes into this anecdote. He says, when I was in the Citadel, I went into a room and there was a chair in the room. And I went up to the chair and I saw that there was an indentation in the chair. I could smell that there was this perfume in the air. And I knew that just before I'd entered this room, a woman had been sat in that chair. And that's what it's like when someone dies. There's something that lingers. And that seems to be what is driving his research, is this idea that something lingers and of a person even after they die. And this is what we definitely see in people who die and get brought back in this world of ice and fire. People like Lady Stoneheart, for example. Cat Stark died. Something lingered of her. The thing that lingered there was clearly this burning desire for revenge. The same with Beric Dondarrion. Something lingered of him, and that remained. Lots of him had gone, but something lingered. Now, what is it that powers the Weirwood network? Well, it's a really interesting question, and one I probably will do a video about at some point. But the thing that they do seem to need or want or encourage is sacrifice, or blood offerings. And this is something that definitely seems to be good for the Weirwood network in some way, and it certainly seems to be the Weirwood network kind of sucks up the memories and lived experiences. At least this is what the kind of the legends seem to be from the Children of the Forest, and we kind of see that with Bloodraven. Ironically, as we're talking about House Blackwood, much later he is now hooked up into the Weirwood network, and it does feel as if he's kind of being sucked up within it. His body there, as this sort of husk of a body, is still there, but he is being kind of sucked up within the Weirwood network. How this links across to House Blackwood, as well as what we've just been talking about with Bloodraven, is that we have this colossal Weirwood tree, and we discover that a lot of the Blackwood family get buried underneath it. This echoes House Stark, incidentally, who they bury their dead in the crypts under Winterfell, but it's not just generically under Winterfell Castle. It's the entrance to the crypts is right next to the Godswood, so they are burying them under the Weirwood tree. It's just a step here, I think, Robbie, to say that is what powers the Weirwood network. I'm not sure whether I completely buy in to this idea that the reason why they're trying to stop the others is because the others are disconnecting these nodes. I think it's really good thinking. And as I say, at some point I will get back to a video about the Weirwood network and how that operates, because I think it's something there's something in there. Andrew K saying Benji Cott is a total badass, but also a bit hard to take a 10 or 11-year-old thrust into such battles. Yeah, I mean, this is something George R. Martin does a lot. He has younger people than in our modern society would think sort of would work well in battle situations. Yeah, it's. I think the thing is with Fire and Blood is that this is collected stories as much as anything, and people will tell great tales about what happened in battle. So I'm not 100% sure that everything that gets accredited there is necessarily the truth, but yeah, he does seem like a bit of a badass. Ranabir Mitra saying, please give Michael Talks About Stuff a shout out. His videos are absolutely good. Great theories, tinfoil, but at least backed with evidence. Well, happy to give a shout out. Let me know. I mean, I recognize the name. I can't off the top of my head remember if I've seen any videos, but I'm happy to give a shout out, and feel free to give a link in the chat. Question from Stephanie Lash. Yes, the tweaks worked. The mic is great. Thank you. Good. Well, I'm very pleased. I'll be honest, the biggest tweak this week is just put the microphone on top of a very thick book, bringing the microphone up. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. Question: do you think the weirwood trees will survive long term? Will these forests return, presumably after the others are defeated? Well, yes. I mean, I think that there's certainly an argument that thematically the weirwood trees are Westeros, in as much as the way that we imagine them, understand them, is that they're all connected underground. So this is when we're talking about the weirwood trees, it's not so much lots of individual trees, it's they're all connected with each other. So we have a weirwood network which extends pretty much across Westeros. Now, is there a reason why they shouldn't survive after? Let's assume the others get defeated in some way, and they do not burn down every weirwood tree, or the Melisandre doesn't burn down every weirwood tree, that the some survive. Is there any reason to think that they wouldn't just carry on? I don't think so. One of the things which is really interesting, I think, about weirwood trees is that they do seem to grow in places that they're not necessarily planted in. We sometimes think, oh, you have to plant a particular weirwood tree in a particular place. No, there's a few pardon me, a few examples in the Wolf's Den, in the Nightfort, where it seems very clear that there's a youngish weirwood tree there that has just sort of sprouted up. So I think the working assumption has to be that unless, we don't know exactly how this is, unless the central nervous system of the weirwood network is destroyed in some way, then yes, I think they probably will survive longer term. Welcome, Ebenezer Germer. Good to see you. Then let's go to some questions from my patrons. So Ranabir Mitra, Ranabir Mitra, probably mispronounced it anyway. Apologies. Saying, hope you and Dan are well. We are. Thank you very much. He's taken himself up to bed, as is his wont. Though if he comes back down a bit later, I'm sure he'll give a little shake to say hello. Little tinfoil, but interested to hear your opinion. The story of the Warg King is interesting to me, especially from the point of view that he and his sons were defeated and the women were incorporated into House Stark. Keeping Bloodraven in mind, and the fact that the Blackwoods originally hailed from the Wolfswood, is there a chance that the Blackwoods were descendants of the Warg King? My evidence points are below. The World of Ice and Fire states that the Wolfswood had a wild clan named House Woods. Therefore, exiled folk from there could be Blackwoods. The World of Ice and Fire also states that House Blackwood originally hailed from the Wolfswood and exiled there by the Kings of Winter. I speculate that both stories are interlinked, and part of the settlement treaty after the war with the Warg King involved some of his loyal clans also being exiled south, aka House Blackwood. Now, this is a fascinating idea, and thank you. It's one of these things that George R. R. Martin tells us not to pay too much attention to the legends, or not to take the legends in the Age of Heroes too literally. But as I said, the story that House Blackwood started out as a northern family in the Wolfswood and then got driven south by the Starks does seem to be explicitly backed up by some actual evidence, by some runes. So the question is, when did they become House Blackwood? Is this, as some people say, because the weirwood tree that they have down in Raven Tree Hall. The ravens go there and it turns black, and in which case they only became House Blackwood when they got to the south. Or could it be that they already had the name Blackwood, or got it, as you say? That's another perfectly reasonable explanation, that they came from the Wolf's Wood and they were kind of like the black sheep of the family. Yeah, it could work. I don't think we have any evidence one way or the other on that one, but it does kind of make sense. I think I've got another one, or maybe I haven't, but my take as to why they were driven out is I don't think, it's the human instinct is to be looking for a specific reason. And one of the things that became abundantly clear when we were going through the north was that House Stark, when it took over the north over a period of thousands of years. House Stark did not always rule all of the north. It started out with just a small area of land, and then bit by bit took over all of the north. And the tactics it used over time changed dramatically. Some houses they destroyed completely. Some houses they defeated in battle and then married into. Some houses they just rewarded them with some great land and gained their loyalty that way. Some houses or some places they just kind of like sort of looked the other way. And just let them carry on doing what they do, like the mountain clans. So there was lots of different approaches that House Stark used over the years. Driving a house or a family out of the north, that makes sense to me, that might be another approach that they had. So I don't think we need to be looking for a specific reason. I don't think George R. R. Martin has sort of given us enough to make us wonder whether there's a specific reason. House Blackwood as a name is intriguing because it's not obvious where. It's a descriptive name, but the answers that we have for how that might have come about don't necessarily completely ring true. Yes, having thousands of ravens come and flock to the weirwood tree every night might make it look a bit black, I guess, but we're not told that's the reason why it's called House Blackwood. So I think your guess is as good as mine on that. We haven't been told, but I like the theory. John Buxton saying, "Hi, Robert. Thoughts on any implications of Sir Arlen coming from Pennytree, and what that might have in later Dunk and Egg novels? Dunk's symbolic home as well. Cheers." Well, cheers. Yeah. So this is an interesting one. It's one at some point I'm going to dive into properly, because the links across are interesting. Dunk is a fascinating character from Dunk and Egg, in that, the way I've often kind of described him as being kind of like a non-magical person, like a center, a vortex of some stuff. Fans of the Wheel of Time, often when I'm trying to describe what this is, I say he's a Taveron. He's somebody around whom fate swirls. It's very apparent when you get Dunk that the coincidences just get too much. First of all, that everything that happened at the tourney at Ashford Meadow is pretty incredible. Then you get they happen to have been in the only part of the Seven Kingdoms that wasn't affected by the spring sickness. Then they happen to have been in the right place in White Walls when everybody was plotting the Second Blackfire Rebellion, the Dunk just happening to be in places at the right/wrong time is astonishing. Even just in that last story, the Mystery Night, the amount of times when he just happened to be standing somewhere in a position where he could overhear something. This isn't just George R. R. Martin just not writing particularly well. Bloodraven himself is fascinated. He's like, why are you even here? And it's just like, how I don't get why you happen to be here. And your stomach, are you trying to do that? And it's clear that Dunk didn't really have the foggiest idea what was going on. So Dunk himself is a fascinating character. One thing we don't have really any information on, Dunk ponders it a couple of times, is why was he suddenly chosen as a squire by this random knight? This random knight from Pennytree, which is this village in the Riverlands, not too far from Raventree Hall. Dunk was just, we're told, just a random kid somewhere in King's Landing. Why did he get picked to be a squire? It's an odd thing. There must be some kind of reason. Pennytree does come up later in the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, when again in connection with House Blackwood, after dealing with this is Jamie in the Riverlands, right at the end of the story that we are up to, the part where we're up to. Jamie basically is sent to go and across the Riverlands, go to all the castles and just claim them for the Lannisters. After Robb's army has basically been destroyed, the North and the Riverlands, because the Riverlands, they swore loyalty to Robb Stark, don't forget. Jamie goes up and just like one after the other goes to all of these places in the Riverlands and just says, right, you're now back under Lannister control. And the last of the places that he goes to is Raventree Hall for House Blackwood. He has a chat with Titus Blackwood, the Lord there, and basically they come to some sort of accommodation, part of which is that his third son, Hoster, is going to come with him as a sort of a hostage. Jamie then heads off and stops at this place called Pennytree, that everyone who's read Duncan Egg immediately goes, I know Pennytree. That's where Sir Arlen of Pennytree, Dunk's the knight that was the knight, Dunk's knight, and lives rent-free in Dunk's head. Let's not forget, this wasn't just like a random person in his history. The things that Sir Arlen Pennytree says constantly being repeated in Dunk's head. Dunk the Lunk thick as a castle wall, as one random example. That's what Sir Arlen Pennytree said to him time and time again. So that's where Jamie ends up. And there's a holdfast there who basically they're still not ready to give up. They're still not wanting to give in to the Lannisters. And Jamie just sort of goes, I can't even be bothered with them. Sets up camp outside, at which point he gets visited by Brienne, and then the two of them head off. So this is a turning point in Jamie's story, which happens at Pennytree. Pennytree is important, but we don't know exactly how or why yet. Which is a very long and roundabout way of coming to talk about when you're saying, are there any implications on Sir Arlen coming from Pennytree? I think, and it's Dunk's symbolic home as well. So I think that at the moment, as far as we can get, is the fact that Pennytree seems loyal to the Blackwoods. And so the significance of that, therefore, could be that Sir Arlen of Pennytree is therefore linked to the Blackwoods. And who else at that time is linked to the Blackwoods? Bloodraven. Now, if you want to go completely tinfoil, you could then say Dunk remembers Bloodraven from before he was connected to Sir Arlen of Pennytree. He saw Bloodraven come in with his Raven's Teeth, with his personal guard, and looked at Dunk. And Dunk remembers this distinctly. Bloodraven just turns. It's quite an eerie, I don't have the exact quote in front of me. It's quite an eerie. Dunk always is just like makes light of everything, but it seems quite an eerie thing as you've got this massive crowd and then Bloodraven's going past and then Bloodraven just turns and looks directly at Dunk as Dunk remembers it. Shortly after, it would appear, Sir Arlen of Pennytree, who are loyal to the Blackwoods, then randomly chooses this kid from Flea Bottom in King's Landing to be his squire. Now, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. We could very easily draw a line back and say, was this Bloodraven who made Sir Arlen of Pennytree pick that squire because he could see something in Dunk? I mean, it's possible, but this is big time tinfoil. The bit we can say, regardless of anything, is the fact that Pennytree is linked to House Blackwood, and therefore Sir Arlen has House Blackwood sympathies. Okay. Have we got any more questions in the chat? Okay, let's go to a question from my Marabia Mitra, just doing a quick follow-up. What about the idea of them descending from the original Warg King? I basically speculate that the battle for Sea Dragon Point resulted in the Blackwood exile down south. Yeah, it's entirely possible. I mean, it's one of those things. I struggle with the stuff that's way back in history to sort of say definitively one thing or another. That fits the facts, but then I think you could find other things that also fitted the facts, because the facts are quite few. We know that they were driven from the north by the Starks. We know that they were in the Wolf's Wood. We know that their name is Blackwood. So there might be some connection in with all of those things. The Warg King was up around that part at some point around then. I mean, the Blackwoods... Let's talk very briefly, actually, as you got me onto this. The Blackwoods and magic, they, unlike, say, House Reed, where very clearly we have several magical members of the house, and the things that they do seem magical. House Blackwood, if you take Bloodraven out of the equation, they don't actually come across as particularly magical. This isn't just like they're always being accused of being wargs or anything like that. Bloodraven is the first, I think. Feel free in the chat to contradict me if there's somebody who's got a encyclopedic knowledge of the Blackwood history. But I think Bloodraven is the first Blackwood who we definitively know was a warg. So the link is there, but it's not strong, would be my case. Andrew Kay saying it's quite possible the Wolfswood was named the Blackwood pre-Stark conquest. That forest known for several species of blackwood trees even. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting possibility that the Wolfswood was known as the Wolfswood, not always, but it was called that once the Wolf conquered it, once the Starks conquered it. Before that, maybe it was the Blackwood. Yeah, that's another possibility. Harry McHugh saying, will the Blackwoods be in Duncan Egg? Yes. they will certainly get mentioned. It depends on how deep into this they go. So there were 3 Blackwoods at the tourney at Ashford Meadow, which is obviously the first story, which is we're going to get. It's going to be filmed actually in a few months' time. So we will definitely get mention of the Blackwoods. There's a slightly amusing bit when they're trying to pick his team of 7, and a few names came up, and then they suddenly realized, hang on a moment, we're talking about having a Blackwood and a Bracken both on the same team. That's never going to work. So they do get mentions, but they would probably only when we get to the village hero. Now, okay, let's talk about the Dunk and Egg books briefly. Dunk and Egg stories, we have 3 already written, obviously. After that, George R. R. Martin has started writing. He got halfway through and then stopped a book which has the working title. This won't be the final title. The working title, The She-Wolves of Winterfell. So that's set up in the north. He's briefly mentioned a few months ago the possibility that he might do one set down in Dawn. But he's also talked about having plotted out a story set in the Riverlands called The Village Hero, which would be a Blackwood Bracken based story. And that presumably is when, as I said, when Egg meets his future wife. So in order to get there, then I think we would have to expect Dunk and Egg to go through, I don't know, 5-6 seasons maybe, which is possible, but I think George R. R. Martin won't want them to be going faster than he writes them, and he's not going to write any more Dunk and Egg stories probably until he's finished writing The Winds of Winter, and your guess is as good as mine when that's going to happen. Let's go to Charis Ballerina. I knew somebody in the chat would be able to come up with some magic-y stuff in the history. Agnes Blackwood possibly predicted Aegon's invasion and the downfall of Harwin Hardhand. Well, there you go. Let's go to a question from Zakolok, saying, Bonjour, Robert. Bonjour. House Blackwood is a mysterious house. Do you think George R. R. Martin is voluntarily hiding some things from us, a bit like House Reed, because they will have a bigger role to play in the future? What if a tunnel is hidden under their huge weirwood tree? Might Bran come out of it? Finally, what do you think will be the role of Lord Blackwood's son, the one that Jaime took hostage? So, in terms of sort of the bigger picture, is George R. R. Martin hiding things from us because they've got a bigger role to play in the future? Well, entirely possibly. My instinct, though, is that whereas House Reed, the house itself is interesting, magical, probably has got ties to the Children of the Forest. House Blackwood, I kind of get it's more individuals within House Blackwood rather than House Blackwood itself having this ancient role. So I think House Dane has got some ancient role. This is why George R. Martin has deliberately said he's not telling us their house words because they're a bit spoilery. He said he's holding back Howland Reed because Howland Reed would give away too many secrets if he emerged in the story too quickly. House Blackwood, he's not really said that. I kind of get the impression that they kind of emerged through this process of writing the story as just an interesting and cool house with some interesting and cool members, rather than one of these ancient houses that has some kind of mission that they've kept to themselves for all these years. The idea of the tunnel hidden under their weirwood tree. So the tunnels, weirwood tree tunnels, is a long running, I call it fan theory. It's headcanon for many people. So the weirwood trees being connected seems basically something everybody now agrees on. There's also, if I take you to Winterfell, there's also the possibility of weirwood roots being tunnels. What I mean by that is if you go to those first 2 or 3 chapters, particularly the Bran chapters of Winterfell in book 1, you will get a description of Winterfell that feels organic. It feels like Winterfell is alive. It's described as such. This is something which has slowly grown over time. The hot water that comes up from those hot springs, we're told that it pumps around the walls of Winterfell like blood through veins. This is the kind of feel we've got as Winterfell as being this living thing. And another part of that is Bran talks about the ancient walls of Winterfell, the outer walls, the curtain walls. There's walkways for soldiers, obviously, to be going to and fro, but also there's these tunnels that go through them, which are small enough for a child to be scurrying around, not big enough for an adult to be sort of marching through. It makes you go, well, what are these? And the kind of impression we get, Winterfell started with the weirwood tree and the crypts and a tower, and that was it. And then it grew from that. And the feeling we get from this isn't sort of written down in a clear description, but the kind of the feel that we get is that the weirwood tree is Winterfell, and it's kind of like a part of the buildings. And so those small tunnels through the walls that we have, along the walls that we have, that Bran scurries along, those feel like weirwood roots. And so the weirwood tree is encompassing Winterfell, which gives it an entirely different feel to this it's just a castle. Suddenly this becomes like a hub for the weirwood network. So if you take that as an idea, you then get this idea of tunnels, which the children of the forest, obviously again connected to the weirwood trees, they live in tunnels underground hugely, and we get this idea that maybe actually there are tunnels that join up through massive roots that are tunnels between the different weirwood trees. So if that's the case, if there be a tunnel under the huge weirwood tree, absolutely. Might Bran come out of it? Well, my working assumption is that Bran, yes, he will escape through tunnels from Bloodraven's cave when the time comes. I don't think that he's going to appear all the way down at Raventree Hall, but he could pop up, who knows, near the Night Fort, near Winterfell, somewhere like that. So yeah, that's entirely possible. Lord Blackwood's son, though, let's talk about him. Lord, I've already started explaining this bit of the story. Jaime, having negotiated a surrender from House Blackwood, Titus Blackwood basically has to give up some land, and he also has to give up his son as a hostage. In return, the Lannisters won't destroy them. It's the kind of feel we've got going on. The Brackens, incidentally, have been besieging Raventree Hall, but doing a really bad job of it. And then Jaime just comes in and says, well, okay, I can't be doing with this. And he just goes in and negotiates. And wins the day, basically. So the Brackens don't come out particularly well from that. But Hoster, who is this, he's described wonderfully well. He's nearly 7 foot tall. He's very thin. He's very gangly. This, incidentally, seems to be one of the traits of the family. They often are described as being quite thin, black hair, and this particular son is very bookish, to the extent that Jamie says, "Oh, this guy, we should leave him alone in a room with Tyrion. They'd have got on great. They'd just be talking about books the whole time." So that's the kind of feel we have. And anyway, Hoster comes along with Jamie. Jamie's going to disappear. As far as everyone's concerned, the rumor is that some woman came along and just took him away. Who, we don't know. What is Hoster to do at that point? He is a hostage. And there is a small army around him, but he's also camped outside this holdfast at Pennytree that is seemingly still loyal to the Blackwoods, and or they're certainly against the King's men, being the Lannisters. So I do wonder whether Hoster will take refuge in that holdfast. And then the Lannister army, not really sure what to do, will probably sort of return home. So I think that he will survive in that holdfast. What's he going to do there? I don't know. But that seems the next obvious step for me. Victoria Gill saying, "I would love a series exploring the philosophical morality of what George R. R. Martin is exploring with some of his more divisive characters, e.g. Tyrion and Qyburn, and theologies." Fascinating subject. The philosophical morality. So yeah, I mean, the theologies, I think, is an interesting one. I've occasionally done a few videos on sort of the gods, the religions of the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. George R. R. Martin, however, has been very clear on this. We will never see the gods, nor will we ever get proof of whether the gods exist. So what, if he is making a point with that, is that this is quite humanist, human focused. What matters to him is not the existence, does the red god exist? What matters to him is that there are some people who believe that the red god exists, and their faith drives the action. So that's where we're at with that. In terms of sort of the moral philosophy as some of the characters, I think, I've tried to do a few individually. So the two you mentioned, so Tyrion, I did actually have a look at, I did a video a while ago, is Tyrion the villain? And for those who are thinking that might sound quite reductionist, it's something George R. R. Martin did say at one point, in a kind of offhand way, but he said, of course, Tyrion is the villain, but every story needs a good villain. If you're intrigued what that might mean for the story, then do go and check out that video. And the Qyburn one, I think this shows, and perhaps this is the kind of the overarching thing we're getting from George R. R. Martin, is that he cares more about what happens in the real world rather than anyone's specific moral drive. Qyburn seems to be scientifically correct, but we're left to judge whether or not both his methods and what outcomes from that is morally justifiable for what he's discovering. So I mean, if I had to summarize it all, it would be George R. R. Martin is not spoon feeding us a morality here. He wants us to make our own decisions on the basis of what we see. Michael talks about stuff, saying George R. R. Martin told us that he's a gardener, not an architect. It only makes sense. All his big magic buildings are plants, not buildings. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. And Maura Lee saying, just a show of love and support. You're the best. Oh, thank you so much, Maura. I hugely appreciate your support. And that's very generous of you. Thank you very much. I think that's me caught up in the chat. Let's go to a question from Johnny Targs. Do you think the Blackwood-Bracken rivalry will take part in the overall plot of House of the Dragon? The rivalry had a nice little introduction in season 1, but I personally am hoping to see more in every series moving forward, as well as the books. Yeah, I think it will. So, again, this is what happens in the books. May or may not happen in the show. I suspect, though, that they are going down this route. If you'll remember in season 1, they introduced, and the fans loved it, the geeks like me loved this, they introduced the Bracken-Blackwood rivalry. If you remember, can't remember which episode it was, but Rhaenyra is there, basically being taken around the country looking for a potential suitor, and a Blackwood and a Bracken both are there vying for her hand. The Blackwood is the young kid, Bracken is an older bully, and they have a fight in the background as Rhaenyra is leaving. They literally fight over her. And like this, I think it's Samwell Blackwood, probably supposed to be anyway. He defeats the Bracken, so that kind of set this up. Now they sort of left it there. It felt a bit like an Easter egg, just like a nod to the fans, because the Brackens and Blackwoods didn't really play a part in Game of Thrones. It wasn't a major concern from people, it has to be said, from fans, but it felt nice. And House of the Dragon did this a few times. It felt nice that the showrunners wanted to show the fans that they understood the wider world. They could have just had some random houses with people there, but they decided to take something which is in passing in the book, and actually turn it into a proper scene and introduce this rivalry. So in the book, this kind of does carry on. As I've said, the two houses obviously take opposite sides in the war, and there are battles straight away. Burning Mill is the battle which happens very early on in the war. We should see this in the first few episodes, not see it perhaps, then maybe hear of it. During that, we do get Samwell Blackwood, who by this point is Lord. He then ends up in a battle, in a one-on-one combat with his opposite number from the Brackens, and Samwell is killed. However, the Bracken is then immediately shot down by the wondrous Black Ally and her archers. So it's kind of evened up, and from this point onwards, we get Black Ally really takes quite a center stage in what's going on. But the ongoing feud between those two does carry on through into the sort of the rest of the dance. But I had another point I was going to make there. I can't remember what it was now. Yeah, I think what they will probably show us in small amounts in the first few episodes is what Daemon is doing. So the strategic position of the Team Black is that they need allies on the mainland. They need a toehold on the mainland, and Damon has decided that the best place to have this toehold is Harrenhal, central to everything, big enough to gather armies at. So he goes over to there, and that is where the Blackwoods kind of join the new Team Black on the mainland. So, and they're the center of that. Right. Gabriel Farrell saying, hi, Robert. I hope you're well. As we're all Blackwood fans here and hate the Brackens as we should, do you think the story might end in the ultimate triumph of House Bracken being destroyed? Surely, if there's one positive of the others reaching the south, it would be that. And Keith Boynton says, and I'll take both of these together. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that in the Bracken-Blackwood feud, the deck is always stacked in favour of the Blackwoods, at least as far as reader sympathy is concerned. Is George intentionally manipulating us here, maybe to set us up for some kind of twist or reversal, or is he just playing favourites? Well, this is a really interesting observation, so I'll start with the second bit and then move back to the first bit. Because the answer is yes. When you read through their histories, even when they're histories that are trying to be quite objective, or ostensibly trying to be quite objective, the Blackwoods get our sympathy as readers. Partly because the Brackens seem to have a great account of doing bad things against them. Partly because the Brackens seem to side with the guys that we're not really sure about. Team Green, for example, the Lannisters. And partly, I suppose, that the Blackwoods are they are reminiscent of the Starks. And the Starks indisputably are where George R. R. Martin wants our hearts to be, certainly in book one. If you look at the different POV characters in book one, you've got, I think, just two of the characters aren't Starks, Tyrion and Daenerys. Maybe there's another one I've just entirely forgotten for the moment, but you count the Starks, you get Ned gets POVs in his name, Kat gets POVs in her name, Sansa does, Arya does, Bran does, Jon does. We're getting all of this story being told us from a Stark perspective. So we therefore instinctively will be feeling sympathetic towards people who are coming from a very similar type perspective, like the Blackwoods. Might George R. R. Martin be setting us up for something? I mean, it's not beyond the realms of possibility, but as I say, I think as much as A Song of Ice and Fire is focused on houses and houses having distinct characteristics, with the Blackwoods, it seems to be so much more about individuals within it. And he hasn't really given us yet, maybe he will at some point, any particularly sympathetic Brackens. So that perhaps is all we need. As for Gabriel's wondering whether House Bracken could be destroyed, it's possible, but a lot of this depends on, and this really would be taking on far too long a tangent, how far the others get south in their march. They have to get past, not just past the wall, but also past Winterfell and then past the neck in order to get to House Bracken, which is a very long way. Now, there is one clue, or possibly two, that suggest that it might be like that. Because in our minds, obviously, what happened in Game of Thrones, the TV show, is that they got as far as Winterfell and that was it. Job done, White Walkers defeated. But in the books, Dany has a vision of her on the Trident, basically on a dragon burning others and whites. which kind of blurs with the vision of Rhaegar at the Battle of the Trident. So it's not 100% clear whether this is her sort of having a vision of that moment and then that being mixed with something else, which is going to happen in a different geographical location. But it does definitely happen there. So maybe that's a hint that they get that far south. And then the other thing is this idea that the logical, if they have an aim of where they're trying to get to, the Isle of Faces feels thematically like the kind of a really important place for them to be heading towards. And that is down in the Riverlands. So 2 possible clues that the others could get down into the Riverlands, which, if you think about it, it'd be hugely devastating for everything in the north. But does this mean that House Bracken will be destroyed completely? I don't think so. There's lots of Brackens out there. It's a matter of how much of the world, the post-devastation world, George R. R. Martin will show us. I don't think he's going to be in the realms of giving us a 20 years later kind of thing, or maybe he would. I don't know, but that doesn't. His story seems to be aimed to be reaching an end point, and then that's it. Let's go to Maura Lee saying, I'm curious about House Blackwood's coat of arms and the significance of having a dead white weirdwood tree on it, as well as the ravens. Yeah. So I think the answer is that this is the obvious one, which I know you also said in your question. Is this the weirdwood tree in Raventree Hall? Is it the ravens? Yes, I think that's absolutely true. Is this their coat of arms, and what's the significance of this? Well, to my mind, it is simply that this is their identity, in a way that you get houses try and put either in their house words or in their sigil a representation of who and what they are. So the House Stark, it's the wolf, the direwolf, as an expression of who they are. Here, the expression of who they are is the physical place where their base is and that tree. So that tells us that they are very focused in on that as a place. What does that mean? It probably means that place is significant in a way. It's if you actually, I've said this before, and I don't have the map up, so you just have to imagine it. But there is a kind of a slow curve in the North Riverlands. We often think of, once you get to the neck, north of the neck that's the north. This is where the worship of the old gods is. South of the neck, that's all gone. Maybe you get House Blackwood or 1 or 2 others who are just like, they're anomalies. Actually, if you look, you can see that there is this sort of curve coming down from the neck of places that are connected with the worship of the old gods. One of these is Raventree Hall. We get Old Stones. We get High Heart. If you remember, this is where the chopped down weirwood trees are, but Jamie sleeps on the stump of one of them and gets some weirwood visions, and then comes down, obviously ending with the Isle of Faces. There is this still remaining arc of old gods influence within the Riverlands, just in that northern or northwestern bit. Diego Godoy asking what the house words are. Do I think they might be spoilery? They might be spoilery, but my instinct is probably not. This I will throw to the chat. What do you think? Is there? House Dane's words, George R. R. Martin has specifically said, are spoilery. but he's not, to the best of my knowledge, said that House Blackwood's words are. One thing I would sort of add, just as a sort of it's a bit boring, but probably true, is that there are lots of houses that we don't know their house words. House words are definitely a thing, but I think we sometimes overstate the importance of them or overthink the importance of them in their absence. By which I mean that if George R. R. Martin has not told us what a house's words are, that does not mean that they must be important, or he would have told us. There are plenty of houses that he has not told us what their house words are. So silence on something does not necessarily mean that there's an important thing there that George R. R. Martin is definitely keeping from us. All that said, I'd love to know what people think in the chat. Their house words might be. Rabbi Mitra saying, "We belong to the tree." That's an interesting one. I'll read out a few more when they come through. Maura Lee saying, Bloodraven's mother was Lady Melissa Blackwood. Is this tied to the first men? What gave Lord Bloodraven his green seer abilities? After all, House Blackwood did honour the old gods. Yeah, absolutely. I'm convinced that it was, and the wonder of Bloodraven is the fact that he ties together the magic of the Targaryens and the magic of the old gods. So he and as well as tying together the magic, he therefore, because he was a great student as well, he also could tie together the knowledge and understanding of the North and the legends of the Long Night and the Last Hero and things like that with the legends and prophecies of the Targaryens, the prince that was promised, things along those lines. So he's the person who brings this all together thematically as well as, I think, probably practically in reality. He's the point, and we often think of John as being, well, he is a Song of Ice and Fire in one very limited sense of it, in the fact that this is the coming together of House Targaryen and House Stark. Bloodraven was a sort of a foreshadowing of that, in a way. He was the son of a Targaryen, so a Valyrian and First Men heritage, in the way that John is as well. Okay, let's read through a few of these house words. Carlos Ballerina saying, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. I like that. Dr. Wizard saying, House Dane's words are R plus L equals J. As the crow flies, Corvus art, we remember. Agree, Weirwood. Andrew K saying, when you mess with the raven, you get the beak. Nice. Carl Karsnark, I don't, this isn't a house words thing, but good spot. Green seer and Blackwood, more blacks and green symbolism too. Yeah, absolutely. John Potts suggesting our roots are deep. I quite like that one. I think that one works quite well. It feels like the kind of the house words that other houses have. Yeah, I'm going to go. That's my new headcanon. Our roots are deep. Okay, let's go to a question from Rabbi Mitra saying, in your old video, The Secret Bloodlines of Azor Ahai, which I think is still up, you mentioned about the Targaryen bloodline being enhanced with the magic from multiple regions of Planetos. Aegon V marrying Betha Blackwood resulted in, firstly, one son being linked away by a woman from a magical first man place, Jenny of Oldstones. One son denoted as sickly and bookish, and also very keenly taking advice from a woods witch. That's Charis II. How do you look back on that old video and your idea that Bloodraven needed the magic of the first men to create the future Azor Ahai? And what about the idea about the regional magical influences needing to be infused into the Targaryen bloodline? Is it because the future Long Night was a worldwide event and would therefore require regional magic to undo the magic of others in that location. Yes, there's a lot in there. That video, for those who missed it, this was and I think I probably even said in that video, this is as close as I get to sort of tinfoily stuff. I try with my main videos to, as much as I can, to be just setting out, this is our best understanding of the situation based on the information we have. That one is more a matter of, this is I noticed something interesting and just trying to understand what that might sort of mean thematically, magically. And the interesting thing is that if you trace the actual line of the Targaryens down, not just like who was king, but the bloodline that we have that follows down from Aegon the Conqueror, you find that basically they keep, as we know, they marry other Targaryens a lot. They also marry House Velaryon a couple of times, another Valyrian house, and off to a few other families with Valyrian heritage. But then mapped into this, we get House Arryn, who are probably the prime example of the Andal heritage, House Martell, who are an example of Rhoynish heritage, and also House Blackwood, an example of First Men heritage. Just the once each time, which feels more than coincidental that you would have just Valyrian bloodline plus the other three significant ethnic groups represented within the bloodline that ends with the prince that was promised. So it's a short step from there to say, was this in some way manipulated to happen? Is this magically significant in some way? I mean, it might be symbolically significant in one way. It does mean that there is the potential for lots of different strains of magic. We know, for example, the Rhoynish, we don't talk about a huge amounts, but there's some serious heavyweight magic that happened over there when they were fighting the Valyrians hundreds of years earlier. And some of that, pardon me, some of that magic has to have fed through to House Martell. We never really talk about the idea that House Martell might be magical with Rhoynish magic, but surely there must be something there. The First Men magic we've been talking a huge amount about already, and then the Andals. I mean, we sort of underplay or are a bit disparaging of sort of the Faith of the Seven and the magic that comes out from that, but if there is any magic, that's where that comes in. So that's what it's an observation as much as anything else, that all of the different types of ethnic group and therefore magic type within Westeros mainland, Westeros, are covered within that bloodline of Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised. The interesting bit comes with, as you say, when Betha Blackwood gets introduced into this. She is the mother of Aegon V's 4 children, and in a way, you could, if you're looking for House Blackwood are trying to manipulate things, you could say, "Oh, look, she's coming in. She's trying to manipulate things." She actually seems not to want what the prophecies want. So she wants all of her children to be marrying for political reasons, and they all rebel against it for various reasons. So the marriages that end up happening, and therefore the bloodline, as it were, that we get that goes on down towards where we're expecting the prince that was promised, that is against what she was originally intending. But that happened, at least partially, because of magic of the old gods, Jenny of Oldstones, the Woods Witch, in influencing events. Right, let's go to Brandon Price saying, makes me think of how King Arthur was said to be a king born of all England. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the feel I'm going for. As I say, it's an observation really rather than a working theory that George R. Martin may well not do anything with, but I don't think it was a coincidence that we have the representatives of the other main ethnicities within and magic types within Westeros placed within that bloodline. King's Road saying, "G'day, Robert. G'day. Do we know what happened to Betha Blackwood? Was she at Summerhall? If she survived, did she have any further part as the Queen Mother? If we don't have any information, can you tell us how much her marriage to Egg as king would have elevated House Blackwood amongst the noble houses?" Well, the short answer is we do not know. We don't have much information about Summerhall, who was there. We know of some people who died. We know some people who survived. One would have assumed that she would have been, if she were alive, she would be there. She's not mentioned as having been there, which leads me to wonder whether by this point maybe she's dead. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. Maybe she died there. We're not told that she did die there, but then we're only really told of 3 people who died there, and others, well, we know that many others did, but they were not named. So maybe she died there. If she survived, then we're certainly not told of her having any kind of influence going forward, which you would expect that she would get at least a mention as the mother of the next king. When there's been such a horrific tragedy, you would expect some mention of her having an influence in some way over Charis II, or as grandmother to Eris II, the Mad King, but we don't read about it. So my instinct is that she either died before Summerhall or at Summerhall. But it's an argument from silence. We don't have any information. As for what impact this had on the importance of House Blackwood, a positive one, undoubtedly. It made them very important, but in a level that we probably won't see by the time we get down to a story of A Song of Ice and Fire. They're at the same level they've roughly been at, as far as we can tell, which is one of the 4 or 5 big houses in the Riverlands just under House Tully as Lord Paramount. Them, the Brackens, the Mallisters, the Freys, they're all big, old houses, lots of lands, lots of money, big armies. They're big and important. And you get this in most of the parts of the Seven Kingdoms. When we're looking at the north, you get some houses that are big and important just below the Starks, like the Boltons, as an example, or the Manderleys. That kind of second tier of house, that is where the Blackwoods were at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire. While there was a Blackwood who was married to the king, and her children were heirs to the throne effectively, then yes, I think you would probably have found that lots of people would have wanted to be marrying the Brackens. In the same way that you get Roose Bolton, who married into House Frey. Why did Roose Bolton marry into House Frey? Well, at the time, House Frey were just about to be married to, they got an agreement that a member of House Frey was going to be marrying the into the stocks, the new king of the north. So this makes sense. If you're wanting to rise up, then you marry somebody else from House Frey, and then suddenly you are related to the royal family. So during that period, I have absolutely no doubt that other houses will probably have seen a match with the Blackwoods as being very politically advantageous, because suddenly you might find of yourself, if you marry the right person, you find yourself like step uncle or whatever, aunt to royalty, and that suddenly gets you invited to the best events. It gets you a place of influence. So yes, for that short period, but I think it was just a short period. The Mad King ruled long enough and built his own empire, or court around him in such a way that old power bases were slightly undercut. He washed away, he got rid of all of the old sort of courtiers from his grandfather's, or his grandfather's time. Okay, let's go to a question from Mr. World saying, hello, Robert. Hi. The Blackwoods have some of the most charismatic characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. Black Ali, Bloody Ben, Bloodraven. I'd love to meet more. Do you think we will meet any new members of in the Winds of Winter, or learn more about the Blackwoods that have already been introduced in the main series? I think, I mean, I would love to say yes. But my instinct is that this story is now not about the Blackwoods. The Blackwoods have played a hugely important part in the build-up to the story that we have, the setup to the story we have. Bloodraven, massively important. The Aegon V having all of his children being half Blackwood was hugely important. Black Ali going back in time, hugely important. But in this current story, yeah, they're a significant house, but I think that their importance is not now. It was a while ago. Should we be meeting any new characters? I mean, George R. Martin loves introducing new characters, so maybe, but I think Titos, he's gonna stick around in his own home now for a little while. Hoster's the interesting one. What happens to him once Jamie has gone? As he's been created as this quite well-drawn character, I don't think he's going to be just like this complete bit part character that we just never hear from again. I think we will discover him doing things, but it's not his story, so he will be interesting, but I don't think we're going to get massive amounts more. So I'm sorry for the slightly boring answer on that one, but I suspect not. As Andrew K says, time for narrative contraction anyway. Have to start that bottleneck. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the this is the point about where we are at in this story. Narrative contraction, I think, is a fantastic phrase. The story is at this moment at the widest it is going to be geographically, in terms of number of characters, in terms of number of storylines. When we get to the end of the Winds of Winter, everything is going to start squishing back down again. Right now, we've got, I mean, you lose track. The amount of POV characters alone is over 20, I think. The amount of different storylines we have. We've got the Marine storyline. We've got the storyline with Dany and the Dothraki. We've got Arya up in Bravos. We've got what's happening with Littlefinger and Sansa happening in the Vale. We've got what's happening in King's Landing. We've got the Dornish plot. We've got what's happening down in Oldtown. I mean, there's so many different plots going on. everything will start coming back together. Danny and all of Team Danny are going to be heading towards Westeros at some point. Arya is going to be returning back to Westeros at some point. Bran is almost certainly going to be heading back down south from north of the Wall at some point. All of these storylines are going to start to contract in. And what that means is that, yeah, we may well meet new characters. And George R. Martin has said, yes, we're going to have new characters, but not as many as we used to. Now is the time we're starting to focus in. Michelle Ramos saying, I will be sad to lose Victarion's stupidity and ridiculousness. Yeah, he's a great character. But yeah, he's not long for this world, I think. George R. Martin, he said famously, he referred to Victarion as thick as a stump. And I highly recommend, if you're in any doubt as to whether Victarion is in charge of his own story, you reread his chapters with that in your mind from George R. Martin, that George R. Martin thinks that Victarion is thick as a stump. And so he is being used by people. So yeah, he's not long for this world. Gillian's saying, please give Dan, that's my dog Dan, best wishes from me and my pup Data. Pronounced Data, not Data. Your coming demeanor and videos are such a joy to those in need. Well, if I can be a blessing to you, I hugely appreciate it. I hope I pronounced data rather than data correct. But thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. Actually, Michelle Rimo, I just saw you in the chat just there. I've got a question from you from Patreon saying, hi, Robert. I hope all is well with you. I'm back again with another magical question about Bloodraven. Bloodraven is the only green seer we hear of from House Blackwood. However, he had two sisters. Do you think there's a possibility that they could be green seers as well? Additionally, we know Bloodraven was raised at court. Did he ever spend any time back at Raventree Hall? I feel like magic of the old gods must be strong there, so I would imagine it would be a good place to hone his skills. Thank you for all you do. Well, thank you. I mean, the first point here, I think, is a fascinating one, is that we focus in. So the great bastards is the phrase we throw around, as these are the bastard children of Aegon IV. He had a lot, and the great bastards were those who were children that he had with highborn women. He had a series of, I think it was 9 mistresses over his lifetime, who each one after the other basically took on the role as kind of like a temporary queen. And he had children with a lot of them, and those children became known as the Great Bastards. And Bloodraven did indeed come from Melissa Blackwood, and we often just talk about him there, and then think of the other great bastards as being Aegor Rivers, Bitter Steel, Daemon Blackfire, Shira Seastar. But there were others, and he had 2 sisters. He was the 3rd child from that relationship, actually, Mia and Gwenys. Now, the fascinating thing is that although these are clearly great bastards, although this means that both of them were, along with Bloodraven and the others, legitimized by Aegon IV, and therefore they are part of the Targaryen family, we don't really hear from them again. Now, this is one of those things where I would dearly love to have Fire and Blood Part 2, because I think from that we would, at the very least, get some hints as to what they were like, what happened to them. But they are to all intents and purposes, two Targaryens, just that we know nothing about, which is fascinating. Now, could they have also been Greenseers? It's entirely possible, but we simply do not know. As for Bloodraven, yes, he was raised at court. So the thing about Missy Blackwood was that she was what generally happened with one of these mistresses is that they would take their place in court and basically, it's a tongue-in-cheek thing of saying a temporary queen, but that was, to all intents and purposes, what they were. They would be installed in the Red Keep with the king for a period of time and have huge amounts of political power. And then at some point he grew bored with them and then got another mistress. Now, what happened with Bloodraven's mother was that she, normally you would get a mistress would sort of get chucked out. Once he got bored, he'd just chuck her out and then the political power was gone. But she was genuinely popular in court. And so when she was replaced as mistress, she could actually still hang around in court, and because people liked her, and that was okay. And so that is the atmosphere that Bloodraven was brought up in, whereas most of the other great bastards were brought up to start with in court, and then when their mother got chucked out, back at their home. Bloodraven, for most of his childhood, was brought up in court. So did he spend much time at Raventree Hall? Well, we don't have records on this. I think the clear implication is that yes, he must have done. One of the things is the geography there is that it's not that far to Raventree Hall. I mean, it might be like a month, I'm guessing. It's 2 weeks ride from the inn at the crossroads, Harren Hall, down to King's Landing, and so it's perhaps the same going up further. George R. Martin is vague about travel times, it has to be said, deliberately so. He doesn't want people coming up and just sort of go, well, actually, technically, this person can go from there to there and such. He is deliberately quite vague about that kind of thing. But you can roughly work it out. So yeah, it's not like going all the way up to the north somewhere. It is accessible to get to Raventree Hall. So my guess is that yes, he probably did. He probably spent a few summers there, and then certainly a bit later on, then maybe he spent a bit longer there. But mostly he was based in King's Landing. Let's... Zach K, you're just heading off. Great to see you for a while. Gillian saying pronounced perfectly. Good. I'm glad I pronounced data correctly. Let's go to a question. Fact, actually, I'm roughly halfway through. This is my chance to say thank you, because I always try to remember. Thank you to my moderators. Well, I'll do moderators first and then my patrons. I did do a thanks to moderators before, but moderators, thank you. You are amazing. I see you're doing excellent job again in the chat. Patrons, thank you as well. This is why I prioritize questions from my patrons. Because of your support, it means huge amounts to me, so thank you very much indeed. If you do want to support the channel, the best way is through Patreon. There's probably a link down in the description, or if you're watching live, I'm sure one of the moderators will drop a link in there as well. Thank you. Raven's Oath. Salutations, Robert. Excited for this one. My question is about the reason for the Blackwoods' exile from the north entirely. Of course, they must have been rivals or affronted by the Starks, or affronted the Starks in something, but why exile and not death? Maybe the reason for their exile wasn't grievous enough to kill an entire line, but maybe due to proximity to Winterfell. Were their original lands the Wolfswood? Yeah, I covered a little bit of this before, so I'm not going to go over the same ground. But I've copied here just into my notes for this the extent of what we know. So we often go into great details about talking about these things based off of one sentence. This is all we have. Their own family traditions insisted, they being the Blackwoods, their own family traditions insist that they once ruled most of the Wolfswood before being driven from their lands by the kings of winter. Now, what follows then is just a little sort of note from the Maester saying, and we can probably believe this family tradition because Maester, whatever his face was, transcribed some ancient runes which seem to back this up. So I think this, although it's a passing reference, I think George R. Martin wants us to take it seriously. I think the thing I would pick out from this that I haven't spoken about already is not so much the fact that they were driven out by the Starks. I think it's quite clear that's pretty standard practice for the Starks. It's not, why not? It's the fact that they once ruled most of the Wolfswood. So there's two bits to that. First, they were in a wood. This is a wood. This isn't like farmland or something like that. This is where they come from, woodland, and it's quite thick woodland, and there are wolves there, so it's pretty inhospitable land to start with. Secondly, I think we can say that it is in close proximity to the Starks, so the Wolfswood is, just the eastern edge of it comes right up basically to Winterfell. So if they are claiming that they were ruling all of it, their lands came right up to Winterfell. So there is a proximity thing there, and the Starks would want to get rid of them because they wanted to have control of the Wolfswood themselves. And secondly, the Wolfswood is massive. It stretches hundreds of miles. This isn't just a small wood. This is huge. So from those things, I think we can just draw the picture that they were at some point, although we don't get this as written out as such, at some point they were a huge, powerful family right slap bang next to the Starks. Of course the Starks would want to control them, get rid of them in some way. The phraseology driven from their lands does give me this impression of like, if they're in a wood, then maybe they can just go to another bit of the wood if they get driven out of it. But I'm getting this feel of the Starks just sort of working their way through the entire forest, the entire wood, driving out the whole family, the house, and then not stopping to drive them out, not just of their lands. They then had to drive them all the way down to the south. So this is not just like a one-off battle that they lost. House Blackwood lost. This is a long campaign by the Starks, a decisive campaign to just get rid of them. So the Blackwoods, there's a story there. We just do not know the story. They were the closest, biggest rivals to the Starks, and the Starks drove them out. Ranabe Mitra saying, if you compare the sigils of House Stonetree of Harlaw in the Iron Islands and House Blackwood, you'll notice that they're exactly the same, white or grey weirwood on a black background, except that the Blackwoods have encompassed it with red and ravens encircling it. Does this suggest that when the exile began from the Wolfswood all those years ago, Part of the old gods worshipping folk that travelled south of the neck also bifurcated and went across to the Iron Islands to set up base. Harlaw, which is where House Stonetree are, is the closest island from the coast near the neck. Yeah, I want to cover this in a lot more detail when we get across to the Iron Islands, because there's lots to suggest that the Iron Islands ethnically come from the First Men. The Iron Islanders, they come from the First Men. How and when they got across there is a matter of some speculation, but the fact that there are more than, well, there are several hints that there were weirwood trees on the Iron Islands, but then they stopped working. Which from the stop working, they died. So we have stone tree. We know that weirwood trees turn to stone after they die. There's also several places where it looks like there might have been an old tree there. So on Old Wick as well, the Naga's ribs, big, tall, white things sticking up out of the ground. They think this is the dragon bones. They sound a bit like dead weirwood trees to me. So there are hints there. Does this mean that they came across from the Blackwoods? I don't think necessarily, but the link across to the north, I think, is very strong. Carl Carsonock saying stone tree equals petrified wood equals old or dead weirwood. Absolutely, it's certainly my working assumption on this one. Sarah A. Why was Bloodraven and all the other Targaryens convinced that the prince that was promised must sit on the Iron Throne? Every member of the royal family is a prince, and the younger brother has more time for heroics in the north. Okay. I mean, one of the things that I am most looking forward to in House of the Dragon, in the Winds of Winter, is this slow unpacking of what exactly are these prophecies that the Targaryens have got, because it's at the moment it's not clear what we've got. We got this kind of breakdown from the House of the Dragon, which we're told George R. Martin signed off on. Big thumbs up. That we get Aegon had a dream, and we get Viserys telling Rhaenyra what this dream was. It's clear that was passed down from generation to generation, but seemingly just orally. One person tells another person. So after 3, 4, 5 generations, then it's probably not exactly the same as it was to start with. We also then get what later becomes the cat's paw dagger, which when you put it in the flames, this kind of message appears that basically says, from my bloodline comes the prince that was promised. That seems connected to the prophecy, but we haven't been told what the connection is yet. And that clearly isn't all of the prince that was promised prophecy. There's some more going on there somewhere. So we've got a disconnect between what the original dream that Aegon had was and what was passed down to Rhaenyra, and what the prince that was promised prophecy is, and what is on this dagger, and how does this all tie in together? So that I'm hoping that we get a bit more clarity on all of that as we go through, because the prince, you're right, the prince, we don't know what the exact, assuming this is in Valyrian, we don't know the exact word, prince or princess, but it doesn't say king or queen. It's notable that when Rhaegar, who apparently studied a lot of this, when Rhaegar was deciding who was the prince that was promised, first of all, he thought it was him when he was prince. And then he thought it was his son, who was also a prince. So he didn't necessarily think that at the moment that somebody gets labeled that they are king. He thought that they were, however, from the kingly lineage. So, do they think that the prince that was promised must sit on the Iron Throne, or do they think that whoever sits on the Iron Throne has to fulfill the things in that first vision, or is the prince that was promised separate? We haven't got the clarification on that. If I garbled that slightly, let me just sort of clarify it. We've got two different things. We've got the dream, which talks about the Targaryens have to be sat on the Iron Throne and the Westeros has to be united. And then we've got this prince that was promised, who seems to be the person who's leading the fight in some way against the others. We don't know the connection between them. We don't know whether that is exactly the same, the person, or whether this is just a charge to the Targaryens as a whole that they have to be sitting on the Iron Throne, but at some point this prince was promised. We haven't yet been given how they all tie together. So I think, Sarah, my sort of answer is it's a little bit muddy at the moment, but I think that the understanding within Targaryens was not that the person who is the prince that was promised necessarily has to be king, but they do have to come from that royal lineage. Alexandra Vladimets, your first super chat. Thank you very much. Saying thank you, creator and chat, for in-deep diving into Game of Thrones tea label tips and pouch embroidery ideas over the years. Wow, managed my first super chat. Well, thank you very much, hugely. Pouch embroidery ideas. The chat goes to places I'm entirely oblivious of, but I'm glad that you're getting good things going on there. Andrew Cade just going back, you say not to get any further off topic, but the Grey King, who's this legendary king in the Iron Islands, has some hooked into the Weirwood net echoes as well. Yeah, absolutely. Carl Karsnark saying iron and stone are both hard, and it would make for literal hardwoods, as it were. Just not sure if they're the exact same material in the books. Yeah, interesting. Right, let's go to a question from Catherine Furseth, saying, hi, Robert. I'm stuck by it being said that some Blackwoods are buried under the Weirwood tree at Raven's Hill. Raven Hall. This has clear echoes of the crypts of Winterfell, which are also interconnected or infused with the Weirwood roots. Do you think there is any connection, or do you think this has any significance? Well, yeah, I think it has significance, particularly when we've already drawn out a few of these kind of parallels with the Starks. If you think that the House Blackwood were right up, literally next door neighbors to the Starks, and the Starks set up Winterfell to be burying their dead underneath the Weirwood tree, and then House Blackwood went down south and then did exactly the same thing. I think it's more than just a coincidence. I think that this was a thing that had, for whatever reason, been decided was the right thing to do up there in the north, and they brought that down to the south. I mean, just as a throwaway comment, I don't think there's any evidence for this at all, but just as another possibility, yes, we read about them being driven down to the south, but maybe they ended up where they were because they heard rumors of this colossal tree if they were connected, if they're so focused in on weirwood trees that they always were, and they heard of this legendarily colossal tree, then maybe they decided, well, let's go there. And the Starks took this as an opportunity to claim the victory. So, as I say, there's no evidence of it, but that's another way of looking at it. Because let's not forget that the weirwood tree, in order for it to be colossal, it presumably had to have been growing for a very long time, and we know that it's been dead for a very long time. So it must be very, very old. And even at the time when the Blackwoods were heading south out of the north to set up a new home, it will already have been massive, presumably at that point as well. Sorry, that was a bit of a digression. Just as a point of fact, not all of the family, the Blackwood family, get interred under the weirwood tree. Some of them they get in cairns, but yes, the practice of, they certainly ask for the bodies of their dead to be brought back within a Song of Ice and Fire in order to be buried beneath the weirwood tree. So this is a practice that's been going on for thousands of years. Raven's Oath. George R. R. Martin has singularly tasked the ladies of House Blackwood to enchant any character that lays an eye on them. Furthermore, we find the spread of old magic in different families via these ladies. Is there some secret specifically about the women of House Blackwood? Hashtag hot goth Blackwood lady. Is there some secret specifically? Well, as I say, it's notable about the Blackwoods that the most significant characters in this are female, and one of the most significant things about them is who they marry, but that never comes across in a kind of submissive way that they have been sold off to be married to such a person for political reasons. No, this seems to be their decision. So it's made clear that Betha Blackwood, when she married Aegon V, this was a love marriage between the two of them. She is known to be very strong-willed, and he, as a member of the royal family, probably you'd expect him to have a political marriage, but because at the time he was still quite low down in the line of succession, they did allow this love marriage. So this seems to be something she seems to have clearly personally have been set on. Similarly, Black Ali marrying Cregan Stark, this seems to have been her doing the driving here. I mean, he seems a very willing participant, it has to be said, but she is the person who initiates this. As for Melissa Blackwood and Aegon IV, obviously they never did marry, but she seems to be quite a big and strong personality, much loved in court. So whereas the Brackens, we're told they I don't know quite the best or most delicate way of saying this, but they seem to have trained up their daughters in order to try and get them to be mistresses of Aegon IV. That doesn't seem to be the case with Melissa Blackwood. So these women seem to be very important plot-wise for who they marry, but not in a they're being married off way, but in a they are deciding who they marry kind of way. Is there some magic that they have? Well, we don't know. If there is, it's below the radar. We've not seen this. We're not told of it. There's no hints. The Maesters are very quick in Fire and Blood to be trying to find excuses to say, well, this woman over here cast this spell on that poor man there. We don't really get a hint of that with the Blackwoods. There's not this kind of suggestion of magic sort of hanging over the family. So my instinct again is no, there isn't, but the spread of old magic into different families, it's the sort of, certainly the magical gene does certainly seem to be spreading out through them, if that makes sense. Username redacted. Will they be the Weirwood Network / Bran's chosen Lord Paramount of the Riverlands? Does their faith make them favoured in any way? Okay, so on the working assumption, Bran at the end of the story becomes king of the 7 or 6 kingdoms or whatever we have left at the end, and on the working assumption that he then decides that he's going to keep the same broad model of governments with a Lord Paramount of each region. I think, who would he have for the Riverlands? Well, you have to say that the Tullys, it would be quite a snub to the Tullys to take that power away from them, is rough, basically what I would say, because that's his mother's family. And so and they've been through a lot for the Starks. Let's not really beat around the bush. Whatever you might think of Edmure Tully, he got forced into a political marriage that he was not sure about, because of Robb Stark's breaking of his vow to marry a Frey. The result of that was that Edmure Tully had to marry a Frey. Then he turns up for his wedding, and at his own wedding, he then gets captured and imprisoned. So this is, they've not done great out of this. The Tullys, the Blackfish has been admirably pulling his weight, it has to be said, in the Riverlands. Cat has, she's had an impact in many, many different ways. I think that to take it away from the Tullys would feel harsh to me. Might he want the Blackwoods in a position of power? Perhaps, but I don't think that if we're going with this idea that we have King Bran as the Weirwood Network ruling, I don't think that he would think that necessarily the most important thing is to be a Lord Paramount. I think that his idea of power would be slightly different. Michelle Remo saying, in the upcoming seasons of House of the Dragon, I wonder if Ali, this is Black Ali, might be using a Weirwood bow and arrow like Bloodraven and the Raven's Teeth. Do you think the show might show an indication of magic a la Bloodraven and the Red Grass Field? Okay, so Weirwood arrows crop up from time to time. One of the more famous examples is when Torrhen Stark came south with his army to face the invading Targaryens. His bastard brother got 3 Weirwood arrows with the idea that he was going to shoot them and kill the dragons with them. We then get the Raven's Teeth, the Battle of Redgrass Field. This is the first Blackfire rebellion. Yes, again, we're talking about Weirwood bows and arrows. And the way the story is told is that Bloodraven himself used his magic to be sort of directing where those arrows went, because those arrows then rained down fire on the Blackfires, and it was one of the most important moments in that battle, pivotal moments in that battle. Will we see Black Ali with Weirwood bow and or arrow? Yeah, I think that's a reasonable guess, actually. I think that one of the things which was most notable in season 1, it has to be said, unnecessary is probably the wrong way of saying it, but the Weirwood tree in the Red Keep was noticeable. And you have to sort of take your mind back. Nobody was really expecting it until we saw it, because famously in the Red Keep, by the time of A Song of Ice and Fire, there is no weirwood tree there. And when Sansa, for example, goes to pray in the Godswood, then I think it's to an oak or something that she goes to. There is no weirwood tree. So actually going back and not just introducing a weirwood tree in King's Landing in the Red Keep, but also making it a central part of what is going on. You get some of those early scenes between Alicent and Rhaenyra were there. We get the scene between Alicent and Larys, where James, feel free to go and check out his videos, where he's speculating wildly in his wonderful way, backed up by evidence, not just randomly, where you get, it feels like the weirwood tree itself is talking to Alicent, but the way that they've structured the scene, you get Larys and Alicent and then the weirwood tree in between them. That's certainly going to be a significant. We're certainly going to see another weirwood tree at Harrenhal. So they are playing up this element of it. And yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they bring in this with Black Aly, they bring in her having weirwood arrows or something like that. Right, let's go to a question from Travis saying, hello, Robert. Hi. We always discuss Bloodraven as a Targaryen bastard, but could you discuss him from the context of being a Blackwood? For example, before this, I never made the connection that the Blackwoods are the house, I would argue, most strongly connected to the Weirwoods, and Bloodraven literally fuses with a Weirwood. Yeah, I mean, we've touched on this from various angles already in this stream, but it's important that Bloodraven is the fusing of the two types of magic, I think. And added to which, the magic that we see him use seems to be more old gods magic, Green Seer magic, than Targaryen magic. Now we see him use the as far as we can tell, magic to be when he sort of glamours himself to become Maynard Plum. That's not specifically Targaryen magic, that's just generalized magic. But the other things that we hear about him doing, the walking into animals, things like that, that's from his Blackwood side. So what we don't hear is the biggest Targaryen magic-y thing, which is these dragon dreams. Maybe he did have them, maybe he didn't, but that does not get played up. And then obviously when he goes up to the wall, then he's almost 100% about the Weirwood network. So yes, I think we think about him as a Targaryen, but he is more focused on the other side of the old gods magic than he is the Targaryen magic. But the key thing here, I would argue, is it's the fusing of the two. One thing I would love to sort of pick up on very briefly, though, is you're saying the House Blackwood is the house most associated with weirwood trees. I think that's a fascinating way of looking at this, which is they're the one with the weirwood tree on their sigil. They're the one with the biggest weirwood tree, this colossal weirwood tree. And yet, irony of ironies, their weirwood tree is dead. So what's that trying to tell us? I don't know. But it's noticeable that George R. R. Martin has put this family, which is most associated with the weirwood tree, their weirwood tree being dead. Right, let's go to a question from 444. We sort of connected to this, I guess, saying, is the dead weirwood tree and raven tree only a nice detail, or is there something more about it? Well, clearly there's more. Again, I've talked about this from several angles. I did want to use this, though, as a moment to share something that I had not spotted before until I was just doing a bit of research before this live stream, which absolutely fascinated. And I would love, in the chat, feel free to speculate wildly about what this means, because it feels significant, but I've not had the chance to work through it all yet. Adam Velaryon, you'll remember him. He is one of the dragon seeds, and he is, we think, I don't know which way House of the Dragons are going to go on this one, but he is probably Corlys Velaryon's bastard son. The fascinating thing about Adam Velaryon is that he flies off to the Isle of Faces. For what reasons? We do not know. Perhaps it's just because it's an interesting place for him to go. He lands on the Isle of Faces. He apparently talks to the Green Men. He gets back on his dragon. He flies to Tumbleton, to a battle, and he dies. He, therefore, is one of only two named characters that we know who, in all of the recent history of this world, have been to the Isle of Faces. This is the apparent heart of the Weirwood network. The only other one, of course, being Howland Reed. Adam Velaryon, we assume, was not invited, but just sort of landed down on his dragon on the island, because the island's defenses were against people approaching by boat. If you ever tried to approach the isle, then mysterious currents would push you away. The wind would blow you away. Birds would come in and start attacking you until you turned around. You could not approach the island. But on a dragon, yeah, you could. So Adam Velaryon, for reasons we do not know, landed on the Isle of Faces, talked to the Green Men, flew off again, and then died. And then, this is the thing that I only just noticed, then his body was taken by House Blackwood and taken and stored for 8 years at Raventree Hall before Alyn, Adam's brother, claimed it and took it back, and he got buried at Driftmark. For 8 years, Adam Velaryon's body, the only body that we know, the only person that we know outside of Howland Reed to have visited the Isle of Faces, his body lay at Raventree Hall. What does this mean? I'd be fascinated to know what your thoughts are in the chat. It's not, I'm sure, a coincidence. Were they wishing the Weirwood network to be sort of sucking up the knowledge and experience of what happened there? I don't know. Let's having a quick flick through the chat. Michelle Reimer saying, just reread Fire and Blood. How did I forget that? Yeah, it just happens. I think it's just a very brief mention. We're not. Our attention is not drawn to it. Carl Karsnark saying, Adam Velaryon and magic trees give off big time Bible vibes too. Makes you wonder who his Eve is or was. Northern Tommy saying, hey, just popping in to say hello and see where we're at. Good to see you. Andrew K saying, birds came in to send them off, but sea smoke just ate them. Yeah, absolutely. You're not stopping a dragon from landing there. Joel the Dreamer, thank you for the super chat, saying, through Betha and Melantha Blackwood, the Starks and Targaryens are likely related. Oh yeah, interesting. So the Blackwoods obviously married into the the Stark family and the Targaryen family, so that does relate them. One of the things though we should probably point out with the not just the Blackwoods, but lots of houses. George R. R. Martin is great at giving family trees for the big houses, the Targaryens, Lannisters, Starks, things like that. But for the medium-sized houses, there's lots of gaps. And so we don't know exactly how different people are related to each other. That said, yes, they are related. But whether it's a close relation or not, I do not know. Dean of Frederick saying, another instance of Robert just saying, and then he died. Well, he did just die. It's just a statement of fact. Is that a thing I say? Apparently it is. It's Graydon saying he flew into battle with a dragon. Yeah, so when we get there in House of the Dragon, Tumbleton is going to be massive and shocking. Did his dragon die too? Yep. His dragon died too. Michael talks about stuff saying there is that weird line about how the children of the forest were able to speak to the dead. I wonder if with old gods magic they could somehow get some secrets from the dead body, possibly just the something lingered, they just let that go, and so other people could not extract what he had learned. So I mean, this is the other way of looking at it. I think instinctively, and I've not developed my thinking on this, as I say, I literally only just sort of spotted this afresh when I was preparing for this. There are two broad ways of looking at it. The first is first of all, noteworthy that they did this. They took a random body and looked after it. We're not told of other random bodies that got collected and looked after in what was a horrific battle. But two possible reasons: because they wanted it for a particular purpose in order to give it to the weirwood tree in some way, or they were just protecting it from other people because he had got certain knowledge that he gained from the Isle of Faces, and they didn't want other people getting that. Those are the two starting points that I have right now. But yeah, maybe we'll come back to this on a future week if I've done a bit more thinking, of somebody comes up with something fascinating. So Joel the Dreamer saying Betha Blackwood might have been queen when Melantha was Lady of Winterfell. Yes. It's the link between these characters is the bit that we don't know because we haven't got the family tree. Let's go to I've got two more questions from my patrons, so now is a good time to drop things into the chat. Actually, Michelle Ramo saying Ali Bliss is Black Ali, so this is Team Blackwood, did defend Corlys and fight for his freedom. Maybe House Blackwood respects House Velaryon, which could explain them protecting Adam's body. Yeah, that's an interesting link. So this was the specific thing that Ali Blackwood was gaining, which was clemency for Corlys Velaryon. Does this link across to another part of House Blackwood looking after the body of probably Corlys's bastard son? It's an interesting possibility. Right, two questions left. Matthew Hawkins. Dear Robert, do you subscribe to the fan theory that Varys is a Blackfire himself? If so, could he be a descendant of either a Blackwood or a Bracken? Well, this is, I mean, it is a bit of a tangent, but I see where you're coming from here. So Varys, we all know Varys. Varys in the books has got a plot going on with Illyrio to put Fagon, young Griff, onto the Iron Throne. The working assumption I have, and many others have, is that young Griff is a Blackfire rather than who he claims to be. Through his mother's line, we're told specifically the Blackfire line has died out on the male side. A clear implication it hadn't on the female side. So people were wondering, is this loyalty that Varys has because he himself is a Blackfire? Now, what do I think? Is it beyond the realms of possibility? No, it's possible. There are a couple of little hints, linguistic things. His head is bald and described as shaped like an egg, which takes us back to egg. Obviously a Targaryen. We're told very noticeably in book 1, when Cat is thinking about all of the secret passages in the Red Keep and how only Targaryens know of them all, and then Varys turns up and says, "Oh, I know of them all," and it's like, "Oh, does that mean you're a Targaryen?" So there are a couple of sort of hints, but neither of them are conclusive. You could see that thing with Varys knowing all the secrets of the Red Keep and only Targaryens as being actually the other way around. George R. Martin saying, it's not just Targaryens who know. Here's somebody who's not a Targaryen who knows the secrets of the Red Keep. So, do I think that he is a Blackfire? It's possible, but it's one of those things where I think we don't need an extra layer for this storyline to work. If we have Illyrio, this is, and I will do a video on this quite soon. It's on my shortlist of the next few I want to do. The whole plot line, what's going on there. If Illyrio did indeed fall in love with and marry a Blackfire descendant and had this child who they then decide they want to put on the Iron Throne because Varys has experienced what's happening in the Iron Throne and thinks that these people deserve better. Let's train this person up to be their king. The way that they will accept him is not if they think he's a Blackfire, but if they think that he's this, actually a Targaryen. And he's tied into this because his childhood friend, the person who basically saved him from the gutter, is Illyrio, and they're closer than family. That all works. That ties together. It makes sense. So you don't need this extra layer that Varys is secretly a descendant of somebody. Could he be a descendant of a Blackwood or a Bracken? I don't personally see it. If anything, I could see him possibly being a descendant. Aerion Brightflame, Aerion the bully Targaryen from the first Duncan Egg story, he got exiled over to Essos to Lys for a while, and George R. Martin has basically said, yeah, he's probably got some bastard children from there, so there will be bastard descendants of his over in the Free Cities. Perhaps Varys is one of them, is my take. That sort of ties in again. I mean, the other sort of anecdotal thing which could point towards Varys being of kingly stock in some way is the fact that obviously as a child he was captured by a wizard, and parts of him, personal parts of him, were used as blood magic, basically. And we know that king's blood is the most powerful blood, so perhaps he has some genetic link back there. It's possible, but I don't think it's necessary. Joel the Dreamer saying, White Harbour and Blackwood lands probably both have a mixture of old and new god-worshipping subjects. There was a port White Harbour as a global population. The Blackwood lands are more Westerosi. Yeah, that's an interesting. So House Blackwood, we're not told this. House Blackwood itself, clearly they remain first men stock, and they are worshippers of the old gods. We are not told about all of the people in their lands who are what they worship. The implication is that at least some of them are worshippers of the old gods, but we're not told that. The implication probably is that some also are worshippers of the faith of the Seven, but certainly historically that land has had a lot of worship of the old gods in. But in terms of White Harbour, yeah, definitely it's got this mix of the Wolf's Den is there, which is this very much an old men kind of structure. But White Harbour is the most cosmopolitan place in the north, it has to be said, with sailors and people arriving from the south and Essos and further afield. It has people who worship old and new gods and other gods as well. Andrew K, interesting question. Could Blackwood blood coming back into the line of succession, the Starks not so long ago, be part of the recent Stark magical reactivation? So, I mean, this is certainly an interesting question, which is the Stark magic reactivation is the fact that Ned and Kat's children all are magical in some way. What caused that? We've not had a full answer to that yet. If the Blackwoods being sort of added into sort of the gene pool is the case, then you'd expect that would have shown up earlier generations. We don't know with Ned if there is anything there. We've been inside his mind for 15 chapters or whatever it was we had of Ned, and there wasn't really a hint that he was walking into anything or he had green dreams or anything like that. So maybe it just skipped a generation. We do not know. Ranabin Mitra, fair counterpoint, saying more to do with an actual direwolf being in the royal Stark family's presence, reactivating them. Yeah, I mean that's a fair. And Terry Incognita saying the same thing. I mean that it has to be said is the working assumption most people have is that Bloodraven somehow drove the direwolf south with the direwolf pups, attracted their attention there, knowing that the warging connection would therefore start with the Stark children. Last question from my patrons. Ninja Robbo saying, may I ask a slightly tangential question? Absolutely. About how bastard names work. Is it based on their mother, father, where they were born, where they're raised, or do the parents decide? For most, it seems to be location of birth, notably Robert's bastards, but Aegon IV appear to be from their mothers, e.g. Bloodraven and Bittersteel were both rivers. Despite being born in King's Landing, and John is named after his father, despite undeniably being born in the south and then brought north by Ned. So how does it work? Well, so the reason for the confusion is that there's no law governing this. There are some general rules by what happens. So first of all, the common folk, small folk, they don't worry about that kind of stuff. They just use first names, or they use, if you have a trade, that is then your surname, your Smith or whatever. Pardon me. So this is just the nobles. So when you get a noble child who is born out of wedlock, the tradition is that the surname they get is depending on the area in which they grew up. So snow in the north, stone or rivers in the riverlands, things like that. That's not a hard and fast rule that happens all the time, but it's a sort of a generic rule. Now, sometimes you can change that. So you could give somebody a different name if they're particularly associated with a certain area. And this is probably where Brendan Rivers was brought up in King's Landing, but he was associated with the Blackwoods. Therefore, Rivers was the surname that he was given. You don't necessarily keep that name. Sometimes you could choose your own name. You're sort of allowed to. Some people do that. Sometimes they might choose a slightly different name. Sometimes it's you could adopt a new family name. So like Blackfire once Damon was given the sword Blackfire, then he took the name Blackfire. So there are differences. There's no hard and fast law that you have to call somebody by a certain name, but the default is it's where you were brought up. You can also look, so the Sands, when you get Oberyn Martell's children, they're all called Sand because they were brought up in Dawn, but not all of them were actually brought up in Dawn. One or two of them were brought up in Old Town, for example. One of them was brought up in Old Town, but still is called Sand because it's like we're part of this family. We're associated with Dawn. Okay, Joel the Dreamer saying White Harbour could be so mixed that to a commoner on the streets it's hardly Westerosi. Yeah, well, so we get a good White Harbour chapter from Davos. I'd highly recommend checking it out. He's sort of like there undercover, sussing out the city. He'd been there before. He's wandering around. It definitely comes across as Westerosi, but it is cosmopolitan. And in terms of are there any bits, sort of any ports that could be not Westerosi? I mean, not really. I don't think. But yeah, if there are any bits of Westeros that feel less Westerosi, then it's probably the ports. I would definitely agree with that. Let's go. Charis Ballerina saying we talk all the time about Rob's will's impact on the north, but how will it affect the Riverlands? Would they follow someone with no Tully blood? Well, I mean, I think this is a really interesting one. So Lady Stoneheart won't. I think that much is for certain. However, we get some. We get Edmure Tully was one of the signatories of this, so he has basically signed up to it. He's the signatory to the will. He's acknowledged this. Would Brynden Tully? I mean, I think that's a slightly more complex question, but the Blackwoods have. I mean, Tytos basically has had to succumb to political reality. When Jamie was there, they were being starved out. They could have survived a few more weeks, perhaps, but they were running out of food. So the political reality was that the Blackwoods had to give in to the Lannisters. And that, I think, is the key point about most of the Riverlands. The Riverlands are where the battles have been harshest. They always are where the battles are harshest. And so the Riverlands main families are having to just bend the knee to what is reality. The Mallisters are the same. They had to accept the rule of, or the oversight of, well, the phrase came to get them, but it's the same coalition against them. So Yes, I think the short answer is that yes, they probably would still, because they've seceded from the Seven Kingdoms. And what have they had? They've had Robb come and fight for them, and the Lannisters have been burning their lands. They do not want the Lannisters to be ruling them, and they would, if Jon inherits and Jon is a fair and wise ruler, then there's absolutely no reason why, leaving the war aside, why they wouldn't wish to follow him instead. Purely pragmatically. Okay, let's go to the chat, see where there's got a few more questions. Let's go quickly flick through. Wheezy Squeezebox Alexandra, where do Westerosi people keep their coins? I'm going to assume that was a joke going on there. Greet Weirwood saying, being the bastard of a king like the Unworthy, you would probably want to differentiate yourself from all his other bastards. Well, potentially. What's noticeable is that they, the great bastards didn't just stick to their name, their bastardy name. They got their own nicknames and went with that. So Brynden Rivers became Bloodraven. Shira Seastar is Shira Seastar. Cool name. We get Bittersteel. He's not just Aegor Rivers, he's Bittersteel. I mean, so they basically picked their own identities, which I think says a lot about who they are. They didn't just say, okay, this is my fate to be a bastard, or even I am now a Targaryen because I've been adopted into the family. They took their own personal identity, which was separate to everything else. Daemon Blackfyre set up an entire new house with an entire new name. He could have just said, I'm now Daemon Targaryen. And that everybody would go, okay, that is technically something you're allowed to do. But no, he set up an entire new house. So I think that's the key thing, I think, about them. Quickly flicking through. Andrew K talking, speaking of the village hero, that's the Duncan Egg story that we're waiting for. It could also fittingly include Pennytree, which plays into the Blackwood Bracken conflict as they previously fought over it. Yeah, absolutely, it could. And you also pointed out George R. Martin gives us a historical Shira Blackwood. He loves to weave that web. Yeah, he definitely does. Okay, I think with that, Carl Karsnark saying Robert makes bastards sound so classy. Well, I mean, this is a big difference between Northern and Southern English accents. If I were from the north of England, then I would definitely be saying bastard. But as it is, I sound more like a Lannister, sadly. Right. With that, let me talk briefly about some things coming up. I've got a video coming out tomorrow about... I always forget what my video is coming out tomorrow is. Well, here's hoping it's a good one. I have a video coming out tomorrow on the main channel. It's in the Song of Ice and Fire one. I've had another question. Charis Ballerina, thank you very much. Picking up a question from Inglorious Pumpkin Pie. I love it when you do that. Thank you. Are there some Cilia oral myths in the Song of Ice and Fire that you think are canon? Cilia oral myths in A Song of Ice and Fire that I think are canon. Well, I think the only one that immediately comes to mind, which everybody loves, is the others riding giant ice spiders. It's an old man thing, I think, but I love this idea of them riding these massive spiders and then scuttling up the wall. It's horrific. A giant spider scuttling up the wall, being ridden by another. Yeah, I absolutely headcanon for me. Anyway, next week, let's do another one. Let me know afterwards. Leave a message down in the comment section. Let me know what houses in the Riverlands you would like me to be covering. I think we can cover a few of them. What the aim here is not just to be the big houses, and so yes, we probably will cover House Tully, but what are the houses that are intriguing, the things that the places that make you go, I didn't know about that. I'd love to learn a bit more about that. Are they magical? Is there something mysterious going on behind the scenes? So that kind of house that we're wanting to look at in this series. But on this channel, we've got more of the short form content coming out. Over on the Well Told Tale, which is my audiobook channel when I'm just reading great stories, we're working our way through Dracula. Now we're about halfway through Dracula, fantastic story. And if you are wanting to be watching more of these live streams and appearing somewhere around here, will be a link to that. If you would like to support this channel, appearing somewhere around here is a link to Patreon, which is the best way to do that. Okay, that's all for this time. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, moderators. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again same time next week.